There's some interesting news from John Prosser that made me a little bit more excited for that. I'll get on that in a second. I guess first, though, just to kind of recap for everybody who doesn't know, here's your highlight reel of iPhone 13 features. So, smaller notch, Pro Motion display on the Pros, maybe an always-on display, some slight camera improvements. So you're getting a diagonal camera on the 13 and 13 mini. The 13 Pro and Pro Max should have a improved ultra-wide lens, so f1.8 aperture, better autofocusing capabilities, A15 Bionic processor, bigger batteries, and then there's some software stuff for the Pros as well, ProRes video, some stylized looks for your photos and stuff like that. That's sort of what we're expecting this year. So temper your expectations if you're expecting anything else. That is kind of what we're expecting. Now, in terms of the notch, Matt, I agree with you. I was very excited because we had heard all these rumors that maybe Apple was going to finally get rid of the notch and we were going to see some substantial change. And it still just sort of boggles my mind that this is going to be 4 years since the iPhone 10 in 2017. And this is the first time the notch is changing at all. And it's just getting a little bit smaller, which is kind of a bummer. Not going away or making any substantial changes. But what I did find interesting, some sort of late breaking news this morning, right before we recorded this podcast, was that John Prosser had an exclusive on his website that Apple was testing some new Face ID technology. He showed off what was a render of a Face ID sort of, it's almost like a external like module of Face ID, like just like the notch component itself in a separate case working in tandem with the iPhone 12. And sort of the gist of the article was that Apple could be working on this second generation Face ID tech in a smaller notch that could be on the iPhone 13 that would allow you to unlock your iPhone 13 with a mask on and glasses and fogged up glasses. Basically, the second generation of Face ID technology could be in the iPhone 13 that would unlock in sort of this post-pandemic, current pandemic world where a lot of people are wearing masks. It would allow for actual Face ID with that improved notch and improved Face ID components. That sounds a lot more interesting to me, and that is actually a really cool thing. Not sure if it's going to launch with that, but that makes me a little bit more excited for the smaller notch that we could finally get some kind of, I guess officially now, second generation Face ID technology.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've never really thought about it like that, but yeah, Face ID hasn't really changed since it was announced. I think when the iPhone 10 came out to the iPhone 10s, I believe they made some adjustments, but I think it was mainly software. I'm not sure if they...
Yeah, wasn't that weird? Didn't they say it was second generation Face ID?
I believe they did, but I don't know. I think it was only software.
Yeah, we assumed it was like better, and it seemed a little faster and responsive, but as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, the size of the notch, the components, there have not been any substantial changes to any physical parts of the Face ID true depth camera system until this year.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So yeah, I agree. Having new features and a different, setup in Face ID is interesting because that means they're still iterating on it. And I believe from earlier reports that not only is the notch smaller, but the components inside are also smaller. They figured out a way to actually miniaturize those and make them fit into that smaller notch, not just them making the bezel smaller. It's actual smaller components, which is what leads to the smaller notch. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for improvements on the Face ID front. I guess we can kind of tie into this one other rumor that seems to not be happening, which is Touch ID. That was supposed to be coming under the display in at least one of the models. I guess presumably the iPhone 12 or 13 Pro Max. It seems like that's not happening anymore. I don't know. I'm still holding out like a tiny bit of hope that it might happen. I don't think it will, but there was a lot of people that were hoping. I mean, this would be one of the first phones to have a real biometric Face ID unlock, and unlike the picture one that you could just put up a picture of yourself and it unlocks the phone. This is biometrics, scanning your face, and an in-screen fingerprint reader. That, for me at least, was exciting because there are those times, maybe you just woke up and you're in bed, or you just have the phone at a weird angle and you just won't open. Being able to just use your fingerprint, that would be nice. But that seems like it's not coming.
I'm heartbroken by this. I feel like last year, where everybody was so upset at the late axing of ProMotion, that's kind of what seemingly happened this year. We heard from Wall Street Journal, Barclays, Ming Chi Kuo at one point. I mean, these were some heavy hitting analysts with a really good track record, all at least said that Apple was working on one model of the 2021 iPhone that would have both Face ID and Touch ID. And it made a lot of sense, right? It just got us all excited. And that was really, I think, a really big flagship feature. And I was certainly excited for it. And I think that we'll touch on this in a minute. Without Face ID and Touch ID on the iPhone 13, some say it's a little boring. Like, that was supposed to be the big feature. And I think it's sad that we don't see that. But what I do think is so interesting, and what's really ties well into this whole new news piece from John Prosser, is that Mark Gurman just published his sort of take on everything. And he says that it seems like Apple is really trying to double down their focus on Face ID, that they're testing Touch ID and Face ID. They're touching this sort of combination of the two. But it seems like Apple is much more focused on getting Face ID and the components that make up Face ID as small as possible, eventually putting it under the display and making that technology superior enough so it would work just as well as having both. And for me, the big kind of issue with Face ID, especially in the last year since 2020, has been the masks. And Apple has done some stuff to make this better. If you have an Apple Watch, you can sort of do this tie-in thing where you can unlock the phone with your mask, but you can't do everything that you could do with a normal face unlock with a partial mask face unlock, if that makes any sense. Like, it was there, it was nice, but it wasn't really a permanent solution. This does make sense, though, if Apple is going to redo the Face ID components and make it so it works much better with masks and stuff like that. Does that sort of mitigate the issues of not having Touch ID? I guess for me, if it works with the mask and it works in more scenarios, I guess that's just as good as having both, right? Or is that not the case? Am I off? And is there still a use case for Touch ID?
I mean, I think most people would say there's still a use case for Touch ID. For me personally, as long as Face ID works, I find it easier, actually. I like, especially like when you go into 1Password or one of those, things that needs a password, your bank account or whatever, and it just scans your face and opens. I love that. Mm-hmm. Is it any easier than Touch ID? I guess technically no. Like, it's the same amount of steps. It's just, I don't know. I like Face ID. I have no problems with it except for those, those edge cases. And I guess, yes, in the last, 18 months, wearing a mask has been very annoying with Face ID. The feature that they introduced with the Apple Watch, like you said, that was great. I just want to know why they didn't let you do that, like, for everything. Like, they obviously did that on purpose. Like, there's no reason that they couldn't just let you use your watch to unlock your entire phone all the time. Like, I wish they would do more tie-in stuff like that. It would make having the watch much more useful. There's obviously a reason they do that. I don't know exactly what that is, but I wish they would do that.
Obviously, there's this whole emphasis on safety and security, and I'm sure that the biometric reading from Face ID is probably in their eyes more secure than having the watch. And I get there's like a security risk if someone puts on your watch. And
I get that, but then so it's less secure to do stuff in the phone, but it's secure enough to open the phone, which is like the most important part. No. I don't know. I think it's just they don't want to make Face ID kind of useless. I think that's really what it is.
Yeah.